Hi and welcome back to my channel. In today's video you have the next edition of Recent Reads. I'm starting this off on a Wednesday afternoon. I have finished 2 books so far this week and I'm going to finish another one pretty early on this evening. I'm coming at you a little bit later, a little bit after I finish those books, just because it didn't work out to do those updates a little earlier in the week. I intended to read a lot more on Sunday, but I ended up just feeling really blah and sort of sick, but not really, because after Sunday I felt completely fine. But anyway, I didn't read really anything that day, and so I read half of Fire in the Streets Monday and finished it yesterday, and then the audiobook I'll talk about in just a moment. So Fire in the Streets is the sequel to The Rock and the River by Kekla Magoon. And I really enjoyed that. So a little bit of background. They're more like companions, although some things are spoiled in this. Not terribly so, but this is set in 1968. And this one I think goes into 1969. But the main character of the first novel, he's present in this one. His name is Sam. And he's torn between basically the rock and the hard place, the rock and the river. He's torn between his dad and his brother, because his dad is a preacher, although in this book it says he's a lawyer, so I don't remember which he is, but he works with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And in the previous book, in The Rock and the River, it covers the time when MLK is assassinated. And at the same time, so it's also set in Chicago. So at the same time, Sam's brother, Steve, is a member of the Black Panthers. Maxie is also a character in that one, and they sort of start dating because it's middle grade age. At this point, I would actually categorize this as young adult, just because of the age and the maturity of the characters. She is 14, I think she turns 15 in this book, but she does not have the family structure that Sam had, and there were some really tragic events that happened in Rock and the River that affect Maxie, because her older brother Raheem is best friends with Sam's older brother Steve. And I'm not going to say what happened because, you know, spoilers. But Maxie has also gotten really involved in the Black Panthers. She really supports it, but like they're struggling because their dad walked out on the family, hasn't been coming around, doesn't support them obviously, and the mom has trouble keeping jobs. There's just so much going on, and when she's down on her luck, she usually goes out and she tries to find a man to help with situations. But the book actually opens with the 1968 Democratic Convention, and if you know anything about history, that did not go well. There were lots of protests, lots of things that had happened because Bobby Kennedy had also been assassinated, and he was expected to be the nominee by that point. So there was a lot of unrest going on there, and it was held in Chicago. And I thought it was going to be more centered on that, but that was just a jumping off point for the book. Magoon's writing is very haunting. There's just an emotional maturity and weight to everything that Maxie goes through, just because of what life has put her through. And also Sam is dealing with a lot because of the events of the first book. And they're also trying to navigate, are they in a relationship? Are they not? Is it healthy for them? And there's a lot that goes on in this book, and it's just really solidly written. It doesn't necessarily have a complete separate plot event, like one driving conflict. It's more like a window into their lives during this time, and I really enjoyed it. I don't think this is going to be a 5-star, but it's probably going to be a 4.5 star. The audiobook that I read was one that I was nervous about, because I have read one of the other books by this author. He has written 3 memoirs in verse. I think the target demographic is middle school age, although the one that I read this time, Abuela Don't Forget Me, is, I think, readable by anyone. And the first, I can't remember if I completed my thought from a second ago, but the first one that I read, it just felt like bashing over the head with every horrible thing that has ever happened to him. And the author had a lot of terrible things happen to him. I just didn't enjoy that. There was nothing constructive came out of it. Not that someone has to have something constructive come out of their life. It just felt depressing and I did not enjoy my read. This one though, he doesn't skate over the trauma. He doesn't skate over the fact that his mom had, let's just say, a very complicated relationship with him. But this book, the motivating reason for him to write this book is that his abuela, his mom's mom, has dementia, and his abuela was someone that was incredibly important in his life. Someone who was always there for him, even though his mom had a lot of issues. And he starts off, he bookends the story in verse with, you know, modern day looks at his abuela. And those are very short pieces. And obviously those are from the adult perspective. And then in between those two bookends, he talks about his life and how she treated him and loved him and still tried to love him and love her daughter, even though her daughter was completely pushing her away. And it just was, it's hard to say enjoy, but I appreciated my experience with this book so much more than his previous one. And it's at the very least going to get 4 stars from me, which is a huge difference because the first one that I read, Free Lunch, I rated 1.75 stars. So I went through a phase where I did quarter stars. I don't anymore. I probably would have rated it 2 if I used half stars. So those are the 2 that I've read. And I am almost done with a book that I am pretty sure is my favorite book of the year so far. And I know I said that just a few weeks ago with Rust in the Root, but this one, hands down, is so emotional and impactful. And I'm going to have to think really long and hard before I try to give a review of it because it's just that amazing. I have already ordered a hard copy of it because I need to have it. I'll be back tomorrow. Maybe I'll need a little bit more time to catch my thoughts, but I will be back. And the next update will be that book. Okay, so I am back with the second and final update of this recent reads. I have 6 books to talk about. So this is going to be a slightly lengthy update. The end of this week, I was reading a lot, but I just felt really tired and not wanting to do my to-do list stuff, hence a bulk update at the end of the week, which is totally fine. So I'm going to talk about the 3 books that I do not have physically. One of them is on its way to me, which I'm so excited about. And the other 2 were ARCs that I read, and I've got them off my ARC list. I mean, I need to write up the reviews still, but they're not good enough or anywhere near good enough as the one that I read or I ordered a copy of. So I won't be getting those physically. Then I'll talk about the 3 books that I have physically, one of which I read as an audiobook. So we'll start off with the one that I alluded to in the last update, and that is Rain Rising. I loved this book. It was so absolutely profound. It is a novel told in verse, and there are 2 characters. There's the titular character, Rain, and there's her brother. And I forget her brother's name. It's a failing of me to try to remember character names. But anyway, Rain is in 8th grade and her brother is a junior in high school, and her brother has lots of talent. He's super smart. He's an incredible athlete and he goes to a private school. Rain, on the other hand, she loves writing and words and is not really all that great with math, but she also struggles with, she struggles with, and it's undiagnosed, but it's probably clinical depression, and feeling really terrible about herself and about what she looks like. And her dad is around, like he lives in the area, but he's not around with the family. Her parents are split up. And there's different allusions to different mental health struggles that different members of her family have had, including her mom. Like, she talks about how the fact that her mom would just go and sleep for days and days after their dad left. And then there's an incident about partway through this book, which does not become the focus of the book, which I really appreciate. But it was an incident where the brother and a friend go to a college trip, and something happens at a fraternity party that they're at, and the brother ends up severely injured. And he has a lot to deal with because of that. But throughout this book, the way that the author deals with the different thoughts that Rain has, the way that she ends up going to therapy, her changing relationships with her friends, like growing away from a friend that was just not good for her and into new friendships which were really good for her, and the way that it centered therapy and how really helpful it was, and the different ways that these mental illnesses have affected the different members of her family. It was just so profound. And the way that it's written, it highlights that profundity. And it's just an absolutely amazing book. I mentioned in the last clip that it would take me a while to get my thoughts together about this book, and I think I've done a fairly decent job, but I still can't put into words just how amazing this book is. So that by far, it's the best book I've read this year, one of the best books that I've read, and definitely the best book this week. And in comparison to the other two arcs that I read, they pale in comparison. Just about every book that I read this week pales in comparison to that one. So the next arc that I read was The Many Fortunes of Maya. And this had some possibilities, like it could be good, but it just never quite got there. And the title is a play on the fact that Maya is kind of obsessed with fortunes and has made this little wheel that she spins every day with different fortunes from, like fortune cookies. And in this story, she loves soccer, but she also loves the flute. But she's chosen to play soccer and go after playing that, be really dedicated towards it, and sort of playing her flute in secret, in what she calls quiet mode. And this takes place over a summer. Her parents also are doing a trial separation. But some of the things are just never told, never talked about. Like there's possibilities, like the author alludes to something deeper between the parents. Why is the mom so upset? Why is her smile dimming, as Maya says in there? And it just was missing some pieces that connected it. It was a decent story, but the characterization of, like, it seemed like she genuinely loved soccer, but then she ends up not necessarily pursuing it the way that she was so dedicated towards. And it didn't really make all that much sense. So it was fine, but there were just some pieces that were missing to make it probably above a 3 stars. I haven't put it through compile yet. And then we have A Long Way From Home. And the cover, it gives you the idea that this is a sci-fi story that takes place in another world. The scene on the cover is one scene. It's an image from a scene that occurs for maybe a couple pages and never comes back again. Most of the story takes place in Florida in current day. The family has moved down there because the mom is a space engineer and she works for a private company called Space Now. I guess it's supposed to be a play off SpaceX. And they're about to have a launch, but the daughter is just really bummed that she's away from her friends and everything that she knew. And she encounters some new people, these 2 new boys and they seem really strange. And at first I thought, oh, they're aliens. No, they're time travelers. And some things start unraveling and you start figuring out this story, and there's a goal that they have, which the plot itself, it works. But a lot of the narration just tells the important stuff instead of showing it. And it almost feels like the authors tried to dumb down the concepts and sort of like teach them to the kids. And like, kids don't need it dumbed down where you have to tell them everything. They can figure things out. They don't like being talked down to, which part of this book felt like it. It was a decent concept. I just had a slightly different idea of what it was going to be going into it based on the cover and a little bit of the description. It was fine. Guess that's all I can say about it. Now, we go to the physical reads. And again, sort of in the mediocre level, we have The Secrets of Solace by Jelly Johnson. I probably mispronounced her first name. This did not come anywhere close to the intrigue that I remember from reading the first book, The Mark of the Dragonfly. That I thought was fantastic and had a lot going for it. There's still a steampunk aspect of it. Lena Winterbach, the main character, she is part of this world, part of Solace. So it's like companion novels, where they're archivists. And the archivists live in this one center area, and it's a different area from the Mark of the Dragonfly. And what they do is they take all of the items that are scavenged from those meteor showers, where the main character in the first book is a person that goes and finds those things. And the people that they sell it to are the archivists. And so Lena is training, and she's an apprentice, but she's sort of an outcast, and there are people that don't like her. She likes to explore and be sort of a loner, but some bits of her character just didn't seem to mesh. Like, she was snarky when she needed to be, but it didn't seem like the snark actually fit with her character. And then another character gets introduced into the story, and the friendship between them, it's not insta love, but it's like insta friendship. Like, automatically they work together, even though these two characters have nothing in common. Even though technically, if you drill down to it, they're both using each other for what they want. But it's supposed to be this amazing friendship. There's some really cool, really interesting ideas explored in this novel, but it just feels like the character work let it down. So I will be reading the third book in the series. I just don't know that I'll be holding on to the series. Next, we have a book that I started last week, but set aside to read my Pokeathon gym reads, and then picked it back up and finished it yesterday, Saturday, and that is Under the Knockatail. This is a book, a memoir, that I won through a library thing giveaway, and it's one of the best finished copies that I have ever received. And I've decided that this year I'm not going to rate memoirs. It's just so difficult to try to rate somebody's life. But this book is fantastic. It's very well written. It's very difficult to read. And it's written, so it's Mei Tang's story. His son does most of the writing. And his son is the one that does sort of a bookend to the story, sort of like A Boy Don't Forget Me that I read in the first half of the week. But in this, it tells the story of the Cambodian genocide, which is something that I knew happened. And I knew the name of, you know, the Khmer Rouge and Pol Pot. But I didn't know any of the stories of the victims, of the people who were targeted. This family, they're Chinese. So the father of the family, the father of Mei here, he was born in China, emigrated to Cambodia, and that's where all of his 8 kids were born. And so they're Cambodian, but they're Chinese. And the Chinese Cambodians were heavily targeted in everything that was going on here. And it got to a point when I was reading yesterday where I'm going, wait a second, it seems like things are starting to wrap up, like they've gotten to a refugee camp in Thailand, but there's like 60% of the book left. What's going on? Well, it turns out, and this is something that I didn't know, that one of the ways that they were able to escape was because the Vietnamese came in and were beating back the Khmer Rouge, so the people who had been persecuted and ethnically cleansed were able to escape into Thailand. But then in these refugee camps, the Thai government becomes afraid that the Vietnamese are going to keep on in their invasion and come over and invade Thailand. And they, in their feeling overwhelmed at taking care of all of these refugees, and also being scared that the Vietnamese are going to come target them, they actually take all of the Cambodian refugees and they take them to this mountain that's on the border, and they force them to go back into Cambodia. and they have to go down this mountain. And one of the most terrible things about this mountain is that it has been littered with landmines. Thousands of these refugees were killed after having escaped Cambodia and being in a refugee camp, but then being forced out. And it's just a very, very hard, difficult story to read. So I'm so thankful that I won this book in a giveaway, because I never would have heard of this book otherwise. I never would have picked it up and learned the information about this tragedy. And these stories need to be told. The last book that I read this week is These Violent Delights. I read it as an audiobook. If I compare it to Foul Lady Fortune, I'll have to say that I did not like this one as much. Not that it was bad. I just didn't engage with it in the same way. Juliet and Roma just are not as engaging of characters as Rosalind is in Foul Lady Fortune. And Rosalind is present in here, but in a very minor role, a very minor way. And one of the reasons that I hadn't picked up this book originally, because These Violent Ends was on the Goodreads list, not last year, but the year before. And I chose not to read it because of the monster that's described in here. And there are some things about this monster, which, like, lots of creepy bugs and like a madness that makes people tear open their own throat, that is disgusting. And there are a few times, a handful of times, where the description in here, I'm just like, okay, no thanks. But that doesn't last very long, and I was able to compartmentalize it. And so that was not a detractor for me in this book. I did love finding all of the different allusions to Romeo and Juliet, which is what this is. This is a phrase from the play itself. And Romeo and Juliet just has never been one of my favorite Shakespeare stories, but it's a good one. I think the thing that kept me disengaged from this story and not as engaged as I was in Foul Lady Fortune was the relationship between Roma and Juliet, because the whole falling in love portion for them happens off page. It happens before the story starts, because they fall in love across their warring gangs when they're 15, about the same age as the characters in the play. However, something happens and it completely turns Juliet against Roma, makes her really angry at him, and she's like, I'm done with you, and goes back to America. And some of the timeline is also a problem in here, but I think that's nitpicky. So you don't see them actually falling in love. You just know that they had this amazing love story, and you're supposed to believe it. There's some of that in there. I just would have loved to see this relationship before, it fell apart and you have to piece things together in this book. It is well written, though. It's very tightly woven, and I really do like the way that Chloe Gong takes real history and weaves in this fantastical element to it. That's something I really enjoy. So I will be picking up These Violent Ends to see where it goes from here, and I'll definitely be picking up more from Chloe Gong. So there you have it. There are all the books that I read this week. A large number, because all I felt like doing sometimes was reading. And I'm going into spring break next week, so we might have a much longer recent reads. Although, we shall see. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.